the FanFic Critic. I read it, you listen. Ah boy, today's fanfic is another My Little Ponies fanfic. We all remember how I reacted to cupcakes, but I'm gonna hope that this fanfic isn't as bad as cupcakes. In fact, this fanfic is actually a crossover with something called Viewtiful Joe crossover. Or Beautiful Joe. Whatever that is, I have no idea. The author is Bookish Delight. It's rated T, it's English, it's sci-fi friendship, and has 5 reviews. Well, it's rated T, so at least we don't have to worry about anything, graphic. Let's not waste any more time. Twilight Odyssey, the space-based movie land. Ha! Ki! Ya! They say that in space, no one can hear you scream, but at the present, the corridor of this particular metallic complex was utterly alive with sounds of kicking, punching, and defiant cries. Conveyor belts were, every once in a while, forced to move unconscious bodies as they became littered with them over time. The cause of all this irrational, inexplicable chaos? Justice, movie style. 2 people, a young man and a woman both clad in tights, propelled themselves off of the faces of mindless, monochrome, clothed foot soldiers by the way of simultaneous kicks. The man in red twisted repeatedly in the mid-air to avoid retaliation. The woman in blue fired several shots from twin plasma pistols to cover her flight path. Normally, these 2 worked as a team, a nigh invincible duo. Today, however, they were a trio. A pint-sized periwinkle Pegasus, lost on a journey, had recently joined them whilst looking for her home. Fortunately, it appeared she shared as much penchant for fighting as the 2 superheroes she was with. Yah! Ha! Rainbow Dash's hind legs drove themselves against a soldier's skull, allowing her to bounce away just as easily. Due to the innate speed suggesting by her name, she was the first of the team to land back on solid ground. The humans did so just afterward. Their fight was not yet won, however, and the 3 assumed a back-to-back stance as they became surrounded by a few dozen more of the foes they just vanquished. Yo, Sylvia, said Viewtiful Joe. Check out the map on your V-Watch and tell us just how much longer this place goes on, would ya? Checking. Sexy Sylvia, Joe's fighting partner and all, around main squeeze, pressed a couple of buttons on the V-Watch on her wrist. When it responded with bleeps and a display, she replied, the bad guys we're looking for should be right behind this next door. Joe perked up upon hearing this. Oh, this is the last room? Why didn't you say so earlier? Yo, Dash, I got an idea. Rainbow Dash smiled. Should I be scared? Probably, Sylvia said with a laugh. Ha ha, funny girls. But what I was thinking about was, he whispered into Rainbow Dash's ear. Rainbow Dash's face first contorted in surprise, then broke into an even larger toothy grin. All right, she said. But you get to do this once and exactly once. Also, if you fall off, not my problem. Yes, he quickly jumped onto Rainbow Dash's back. Rainbow Dash then locked her sights on the enemies around them, the enemies who would soon be no more. Let's ride, she said. In parentheses and in bold, and in capitals, by the way. VFX power activated. Mach speed. Yeah! Go, go, woo-hoo! The combined speed eras sent a shockwave rippling through the room. Only Sylvia and her powers were able to withstand the small storm kicked up as baddies were scattered like bowling pins. Joyful adrenaline coursed through both Joe and Dash. They knew that together right now they were unstoppable. In other words, all was right in the multiverse. Man, that was way more awesome than I thought it would be, said Rainbow Dash when the 2 finally came to a stop in the cleared room. It's weird, though. In every world I've been to, humans keep trying to mount and ride me. At least this time it was killer fun. Doesn't riding happen in your world? Asked Sylvia. I mean, your little ponies. Rainbow Dash shook her head. Humans don't exist there. At least not as far as I know. Ouch. Well, it looks like you two make a good team at ant rate. Shouldn't say any. Now it's time to show you our combination attack. Joe, baby, let's hit it. You got it, Sylv. 6 cannon, come on. A large bazooka teleported into the room, so large that it took both heroes to brace against it as they aimed for the door. Ready? Fire! One gigantic plasma blast later, they had a way out, into the room just beyond. The trio made their way towards it. You know, Joe said, didn't that seem a little too easy to you? Or are we just getting better? It could also be the supersonic help that's been with us this whole time, Sylvia said. Rainbow Dash held back a mild blush. It's probably both of those things. Just then the three reached the final massive room and were greeted with hundreds of foot soldiers for the trouble. A huge mutant lion covered in flames stood front and center. Or it could be because the big bads were withholding their main force. Rainbow Dash gulped. Fearful Joe X My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic, Climax Pegasus, Part 1 of 2 by Bookish Delight, 2010-2011. All characters and referred properties belong to Hasbro and Capcom. Wait a minute, what? Is this like a second chapter inside of the one chapter? Okay. Fire, Leo. Joe pointed at the large lion. You've been leading this charge? Hope your game's better than it was the last time we tangled. You'll know in about 3 minutes, Shrimp Hero, Leo said, but I'm hardly alone in this. He called up to the top of the room, which Joe, Sylvia, and Dash had to crane their necks to glimpse at such it was its height. Hey, Doc, they finally made it. Ah, said a booming, gravelly voice from above. So the Viewtifuls have finally arrived. Welcome, guests of honor. I am so glad you could be present to witness your imminent doom firsthand. Dr. Kraken, too, Sylvia said upon hearing the suited dwarf behind the glass window built into the wall. Joe shook his head. Ah, man. Him I'm a little less thrilled about. Rainbow Dash put her hoof to her head in confusion. Cranking? Fire cat? Someone let a pony in on some details, please. First, Leo and Dr. Kranken. Supreme Muscle, Mad Scientist, and top generals of the Wado and Guido, respectively, said Sylvia. Looks like we've been fighting against not one but 2 evil organizations bent on taking over all movies. We beat 'em before, said Joe. Guess they're just sore losers. How'd you guys come back anyway? Pretty sure the both of you met grisly, discombobulating ends. We both cashed in our sequel clauses, said Fire Leo. There's always a revenge movie if the original does well. He tossed 2 canned film reels at Joe and Sylvia. Read 'em and weep. Sylvia read the labels on the tins. Viewtiful Joe in Fire Leo's Revenge. Sexy Sylvia versus the return of multi-armed Dr. Kranken. He's right, Joe. If these movies got made, it makes sense why they're here. Joe sighed and rolled his eyes. Only in show business. Beautiful, isn't it? Said Kranken. But we have no intention of wasting our return. Welcome to our greatest plan ever. You've no doubt noticed the glorious alliance between Jado and Udo. Rest assured, you will all be in the loving grip of our dominating hands soon. Ew, said Rainbow Dash, no thanks. With our combined resources, continued Dr. Kranken, we have managed to scan the multiverse and found one particular movie land containing infinite power for us to siphon. Behold. The wall on the far side of the room, beyond the assembled Jado and Guido, raised upwards, revealing a shimmering screen A movie projector flickered to life, causing color to flood the display before them and the universe on the other side to take shape. Joe and Sylvia mentally combed their vast combined movie knowledge, trying to recognize just what movie land the bad guys were aiming for. However, even before the quadrupedal citizenry of the world before them came into focus, Rainbow Dash was already beside herself in shock. That's home. That's Esquistria. On instinct, she flew above the heads of all and took off flying for the screen, only to bump her head against Ponyville as if it were a flat painting. She managed to make it back to her companions, but far dizzier for her efforts. "Ah, so you recognize this place," crowed Crankin from above. "You're a denizen, you say. That makes this all the more delicious. We'll be sure to talk more once you don't have any heroic companions to back you up. Jiddu Force, incapacitate." Fire Leo recognized his cue, pointing towards the viewful duo. Jaddu's troops attack, and the fight was on once again. However, this time things went marked different from the previous rooms. Never had Joe and Sylvia faced so many goons at once, and with a general for support at that. Their VFX powers were used to their fullest, allowing them to take a few dozen out at once and dodge several others, but in the end they were kicked and punched to the brink of consciousness, thrown around like rag dolls, and finally tossed in front of the still under construction Esquirian gateway, groaning under the pain of their wounds. Joe and Sylvia's suits, along with their superpowers, left them. Their limits having been stressed and broken, they were now back in their casual clothes, just a normal man and woman, and unmoving. "You leave them alone," Rainbow Dash cried, still futilely zooming amongst the crowd. There was just too little room for her to use any of her best defensive speed techniques, and eventually she too was thrown against the portal, albeit in much better condition. She looked at Joe and Sylvia, who weren't so lucky. You guys, she prodded both of them with no visible effect. They were clearly out of the game, but Rainbow Dash noticed she herself had barely been touched. They must not have considered her much of a threat, probably because this was the first time this bunch had ever seen her. First mistake. Once the full extent of Joe and Sylvia's condition dawned on Rainbow Dash, Stifles escaped her, unbidden. Two had fallen protecting her and her world, and now it was down to just one. Their sacrifices would not be in vain. She hastily wiped her eyes, turned around, and stepped towards the sneering army alone. "Before I do anything, tell me, if you make it through the gateway and into Esquitria, what happens next?" "Glad you asked," said Crankin. "It's quite simple, really. Our armies will march all over your land, making your infinite supply of magic our infinite supply of magic. Meaning an infinite source of power to take over all the movie lands with," added Leo. "Never would have guessed that power would have come from such a cute place, but hey," he bared his fangs, "beggars can't be choosers." Rainbow Dash nodded. "Too true. Thanks, you guys. That's all I needed to make my decision." She looked over at Joe and Sylvia. "Mind if I mourn?" Fire Leo scoffed. "You've some bad taste, kids, but only a monster on the outside. Do what you gotta." "Thanks." She turned back again, walked over to Joe, and once she was sure the bad guys were busy gloating, tugged at the V-watch on his arm with her teeth. "Darn you, come off." Just then Joe opened his eyes, saw what Dash was doing, and put two and two together. "Whoa. Hey, Dash, you sure you want to try this?" Rainbow Dash jumped back. "Whoa, you're not dead. Awesome." Joe chuckled, then clutched his side again in pain. "Nope, not dead, but we're not going anywhere for a while. We're real sorry. Don't be. I never would have made it this far alone." And at this point, she finally managed to get the V-watch off. There is nothing else to try, right? We're the only ones right now who are capable of defending my home against Celestia knows what. Whether we have a chance or not, I'd rather be the pony who did something instead of allowing myself to be pushed around. Besides, she sighed and closed her eyes. her mind wandering to Twilight, Applejack, Rarity, and the others. Any of my friends would do the same for me in my place. Upon hearing her words, Joe instantly understood. Clearly, within the pony beat the heart of a true, selfless hero. Her gambit just might stand to work after all. Right, look, when the V-Watch starts to glow, and it will once it gets on your arm if it likes ya, there's a special phrase I say. It's... He never got to the last part. He fainted once more a second later. Joe? Dash sighed. Nuts to it. With one last tug, she finally managed to get the V-Watch off, and between her teeth, she flung it high into the air a second later, out of the reach of all. Are you done mourning for your pathetic friends? Said Dr. Crankin. Stand aside, little pony, so that we may march. Dash turned to face Jado and Jito, her face the very picture of confidence, her heart hoping her foes wouldn't see past the ruse. She was indeed scared, but adrenaline was what Rainbow Dash lived on, and today it would serve her well. Her right front hoof and gaze both pointed skyward. Epic atmospheric theme music cured itself out of nowhere. It was time. Grandma Dash once said, if one day you end up having to save the world, be prepared to do the impossible. Fire Leo was nonplussed. You know, something's been bugging me since you showed up. Just who are you, anyway? Glad you asked. The second Rainbow Dash said those words, the V-Watch landed perfectly on her raised hoof, snapping into place and began to glow. Knew you'd like me. Now, what's that phrase Joe always says to turn you on? I heard it often enough. All right. That's it, I hope. She stood up on her hind legs while crossing her front ones. Fire Leo's eyes squinted as he looked more closely at the glow coming from her. Those eyes then widened with surprise and fears. Hey, wait a sec. Isn't that friendship a go-go baby? Her transformation was instant, but if one were to be playing the story back at 1/100th speed, this undoubtedly what they would have seen. 1. A light blue, form-fitting, flexible, and lightly armored fabric covering Rainbow Dash's body, not unlike a second coat. 2. Twin copies of her cutie mark, a white cloud striking out with a rainbow colored lightning bolt forming on both sides of Rainbow Dash's torso. 3. Golden thunderbolts pasting themselves onto her new suit legs. 4. A large light blue helmet materializing on top of her head, sporting a small golden light bolt as its front apex. And finally, go, because justice demands such things, a foot-long rainbow-colored scarf which flapped in the wind on command regardless of whether or not any wind was actually present. A new heroine was born, soon to become a new legend. You want to know who I am? Said Dash in a voice whose force surprised even herself. I'll tell you who I am. Her suit, sensing a fight scene, slipped aviator's goggles over her eyes from the inside of her helmet. With a battle cry, she darted into the crowd, her acceleration now instantaneous, and cut through the sea of foot soldiers like a hot knife through butter, except replace the butter with paper and the knife with fire. Mooks toppled across all sides, none able to touch her as she slammed into most of them with force of 2 oncoming trucks. Her straight flight path turned into several angled ones, a rainbow trailing behind the extreme butt-kicking she was giving in her wake. The Pegasus who soars amongst the heavens, destined to outfly all. The soldiers combined what was left of their ranks, focusing all there now to try and take her out. That they leaped at her, screaming. Dash bucked at her new targets as fast as she could to make them out, launching them, setting them all flying all the while air cartwheeling through the melee. She landed, then used her hind legs to perform a mighty jump. VFX power activated slow. The universe slowed to a crawl, and Dash smiled at her new advantage. This was almost too much. Good. Too fun, too easy. However, she wasn't complaining one bit. After curling herself into a ball, she bounced against all the bodies she left in midair, sending them recoiling in several directions. Finally, she grabbed one of them by her teeth, twirled him around above her head, and then let go, sending him flying downward as hard as she could. She deactivated the VFX power. With normal physics back in play, bodies flew into the walls hard enough to cause explosions, and the one who had been tossed downward hit the ground with a shockwave that cleared the rendered zone clear off riffraff. Amidst the conquered battlefield, the Pegasus landed, glaring defiantly at Fire Leo, the only one to withstand the onslaught. Wonderbolt Dash, at your service, suckers. Dr. Crampkin watched in horror as he witnessed the dissemination of his forces. That tiny little thing was able to harness Captain Blue's VFX powers. This was all he needed. Now the schedule would have to be accelerated. Leo, he called out, keep that filthy filly busy while I finish opening the portal. Ain't gotta tell me twice, Leo said, stomping towards the Pegasus. Hey there, little horsey. I got me a shield that could use some nice patching up. Feel like being the glue? Wonderbolt Dash sized him up and remembered something. Joel told me once about fighting some guy who looks and behaves an awful lot like you. You're a real hothead all over, huh? If I tried to just kick you normally, I wouldn't get anywhere but burned. That'd be me, yep. That your way of saying your surrender? Not really. VFX power activated Mach speed. She knew it was his weakness, but she didn't know that in the second it took to look at Leo, she would be through him in the space of an eye blink. Once she realized that she was now looking directly at the wall of the other end of the room, she turned around to see Leo still flying midair. Talk about intense. What happened when two speed forces combined, deciding to test their limits, she jumped towards the still airborne Leo, somersaulted, and with her hind legs sent a bicycle kick in his midsection. 1, 2, 3, 18, 50, 5, 100, 24, 300, 56, 500. The kicks kept coming, with a mighty two-legged buck acting as the 500th and last. The whole thing had taken all 3 seconds. She was done. She realized that an aura of blue flames had covered her entire body. Suitably impressed, she looked straight at Leo to check on their effect and was beyond surprised to see him smiling. What the hey? Guess he didn't tell you everything, Leo said, getting in her face. Those feel even more like pillow taps than when he does it. With that, he spun in place, claws lashing out, eventually making contact several times with the pony's face by the way of his knuckles at super speed. Combined with fire of his own, Wonderbolt Dash was knocked for a loop and fell dizzy to the floor, whereupon her transformation was lost. Plain old Rainbow Dash was back, and while she wasn't too sure of her chances now, darn it all, she was going to try. However, as Fire Leo repeatedly rocketed towards her, his claws ablaze in a berserker fury, it was all her normal self could do was simply dodge. Who would have thought such a big guy would have such fast limbs? Dash, a familiar female voice called out just then. Rainbow Dash looked behind herself. Yes, Sylvia was back up. Want to trade? Dash dodged another quintet of claw swipes, only to be knocked aside by a shield bash from Leo. Trade? Sylvia held up her own V-watch. Oh, right. Rainbow Dash tossed back Joe's temporarily disabled V-watch and caught Sylvia's. One more friendship a go-go, baby, later, and she was back in action, right down to the outfit. Doesn't seem at all different. I wonder why Sylvia would VFX power activated replay. Oh. She looked to her left, then to her right, and was happily astonished to find that the world was now 300% cooler. Wonderbolt Dash, liking these new odds, turned back to face Leo. Vengeance was now on her mind. Well, well, glad to see there's some fight left in you. Always up for a challenge. The flaming feline beckoned with one claw. Come at me. Charge! The 3 dashes cried in unison while doing just that. Fire Leo braced himself for the frontal attack, which never came. 1 full second before any of the dashes could strike him, they split off in different directions, and the next thing Leo felt was a cannonball striking him in the small of his back, then his head. Then, after he let his guard down to figure out what was going on, his gut. The 3 Wonderbolts took turns hitting whenever one of them saw an exposed base, and even when spinning, there was no escape for the Jado General. Hey, wait, what the? I ain't never seen this kind of power before. Yeah, we get that a lot, said the dashes right before rolling through Leo's legs and toppling him to the ground. Seeing him helpless, the 3 took the time to brainstorm. You girls up for Sonic Rain Boom? Oh yeah, but will it work? If we do it just right, okay then let's get ready. The dashes soared nearly 100 feet up, and making sure their flight paths were in sync, flew around Leo's general vicinity. You know, I can't read if my voice keeps on cracking like that. Okay, let's do that again. The dashes soared nearly 100 feet up, and after making sure their flight paths were in sync, flew around Leo's general vicinity, accelerating over time and placing him in the center of a giant twister. Sylvia and Joe, once more awake, held onto nearby girders for safety.
Okay. Wait, who bloody hell the upset though? Bye?
Leo, unable to draw a bead on any one of them while encased in the tornado, spun every which way in desperation, but it didn't help. Soon enough, he saw 3 very confident winged ponies enter the tornado with him, front hooves outstretched at full speed. And just before the moment of impact, 3 voices echoed through the same room, over even the wind itself. Now! VFX power activated, slow. Power rippled through Fire Leo. Far too much power for him to stand, and he promptly exploded on the spot. Twice. Yeah! Wonderbolt Dash, no longer in triplicate, whooped for joy. Now what do you think of that? Dr. Crankin sighed and shook his head. Prequel villains. Never prepared for crossover or revivals, I swear. His hands gripped the levers of his console. Fine then, you forced my hand. The wall burst open, revealing that 1/4 of the massive structure they'd all been in had actually all along been concealed by a mechanized monstrosity, a gleaming, metallic humanoid body, right down to the joints and limbs, of which Rainbow Dash counted as she saw several more limbs than anyone could have expected. All 8 of them. Dr. Crankin swiped away at Dash, who just barely managed to avoid his new multi-armed terror. In the midst of all this, the movie screen flashed, coming into full focus. The Ponyville populace finally noticed what was going on and began to gather. Ah, said Dr. Crankin, the gateway is complete. The master plan still continues, unabated. No, said Dash, we can't let him get, but it was too late. Within seconds, the giant mech was through, and scores larger in proportion than poor Ponyville. Ponies scattered and screamed as Crankin stomped around, helpless and unprepared. So sorry to tell you this, heroes, he cackled, but there are times when even evil catches a break. It appears that the revived Dr. Crankin has finally achieved his lifelong goal. What fate lies in store for our hero and heroines? Does Esquestia boast any sort of defense to handle such an unexpected otherworldly threat? These and the answers to other questions to come in the second part of Climax Pegasus. That is, if we survive that long. Till then, ta-ta. This story is not complete. People, what have I told you about requesting stories that are not complete? What have I told you? The thing is, I do not like reviewing fanfics that are incomplete. because there's a chance I'll have to look at them again in the future. Good example, Secret Romance. That was not fun to have to revisit. I'm not saying that this fanfic would be horrible to revisit, but still, I mean, unless the author has clearly shown that they have no intention of updating updating their story, don't request it if it's not complete. Please, do not request it if it's not complete. Wait for it to be complete and then request it, because I just do not like reading stories that are incomplete, and you know, it just bothers me. It's a pet peeve of mine. Well, from what I have read in this story, it's very interesting. Of course, I'm not really familiar with My Little Pony or Viewtiful Joe, to be honest with you, so a lot of the stuff going on in here went over my head. But the story had a lot of suspense, and it did its job. And I am a bit curious to see what will happen next. And I'd say compared to some of the other fanfics I've been reviewing this season so far, this one is probably one of the best. Not many mistakes in it either. So it was an enjoyable read, and if you're a fan of My Little Pony, The Magic Begins, you'll probably like this fanfic. And if you're a fan of Viewtiful Joe, whatever that is, you might enjoy it too. Yeah. Well, I'm the FanFic Critic. I read it. You listen. I need a drink.